Hey gang, you are listening to Martian Radio Theater. Martian Radio Theater is a loose network of artists in the greater Lowell area. We produce live events and digital media and focus on the creative process more than making products. Today we'll be talking with folks from a new emerging theater group called Deadword Theatre and their debut production of Waiting for Godot. Would you all mind introducing yourselves and telling us a bit about Deadword Theatre?
Yeah, my name is Charlie Lunardi. I am an artistic producer with Deadword Theatre Company, and I directed this production of Waiting for Godot. And our company is brand new. We're basically a collection of local theater people and friends, just kind of looking to put on productions that we find interesting and that inspire us, while uplifting, local creatives and other artists in the process.
And my name is Andrew Bork, and my title with Deadword is, as of yet, still unofficial. However, I am an actor with the company, and I guess a founding member, I suppose.
Yes.
Thank you for that confirmation. And I came onto the project, I think a few months into you guys already chatting about it, and they fortunately thought of me for the character immediately, which was very nice. Or depending on the character, I'm not sure how I should take that, but that's fine. And it's been a wonderful journey with my best friends from theater college, so theater school, I suppose.
Fantastic. Do you mind taking me through some of those initial steps that have led up to forming Deadword Theatre?
Yeah, it's difficult to say initial steps because it was so sudden and loose. It was like we were all kind of scattered around. Jack Aschenbach was doing theater in Cape Cod with Harbor Stage. I was unemployed in New York, and Jack Yateman was living here in Boston, working in restaurants. And, Jack had just done the show, and he was so inspired and wanted to keep doing theater and kind of keep that community spirit that he felt at Harbor alive. So he called me in New York and was like, do you want to do Godot with me and Jack? And I was like, yes, immediately. And then Jack Y visited me in New York, and we talked about it, and we were like, do you want to do the show? And we were like, yes, immediately. And then we just kind of went on from there, asking people if they wanted to be involved. And basically everyone we asked said yes. And, it's just been, it was a matter of just asking and people agreeing to do it. And that was basically it, which is, the best way to do it, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It wasn't so much wanting to do it. It was more so just how can I make this work? Because I have a full-time job. So having to balance those was really important, but I knew I really wanted to do this, and I haven't really been doing theater consistently since college. I fell into a show with my alma mater, Suffolk University, last year, but only lasted a few months and really was no longevity to that. And when I got the call from Jack, I was at work, and I was like, I can't really talk right now, but I'll try. And then I managed to get a minute, and he was like, hey, do you want to just do Waiting for Godot? Do you remember that story? I was like, yeah, I read it in college, and it was interesting and whatever. And he's like, yeah, let's just do it for a show, and we want you to be in it. And I was like, okay. And I came into this expecting it to be performed in someone's backyard or in someone's living room, which we rehearsed a lot in someone's living room. But the fact that we actually had a venue and it's since turned into an actual theater company is astounding to me, but really cool and really exciting.
I agree. I think we were all planning on it being in a backyard, and then it ended up being so much more just through people asking and, having a desire to do theater, which is great, I think.
Yeah. And it sounds like you guys have a team from all kinds of backgrounds. Have you guys I know, Andrew, you were saying that you went to school for theater. What has your theater journeys been leading up to this moment? Have you guys always been about theater, or have you just sort of found yourself going in this direction?
So I guess for myself, I always had an interest in doing theater from a young age, and the whole idea of celebrity and movies and TV and fame and everything has always been interesting to me. And I was always just too afraid to do it. But then senior year of high school, I did a show. I loved it. Decided, I guess, rather chaotically to give up my current dream of going to cooking school and just changing completely to go to journalism and theater, and found Suffolk as a great place to do both. And it was really welcoming, and did 4 years of theater journalism on the side, and ultimately ended up graduating with just a theater degree, and worked with Jack Aschenbach and Jack Yateman the whole time, and our stage manager, Jake Marino, our other members, Lucas Versan and Liam Grimaldi, and eventually Joey Del Ponte as well. And graduated knowing I wanted to do something like that, but obviously theater is not the most reliable career choice, especially as we quickly entered into COVID. But yeah, so it was something I have always wanted to continue doing, and having this sort of like organic, easy way to do it again was such a blessing. And the way that we sort of did theater and came up doing theater together was a very sort of like DIY. Everyone sort of does a little bit of everything. So it's been a very collaborative and I guess generous process as well.
Charlie, have you initially wanted to go into theater? Because I know that you have interest in film as well.
Yeah, I don't know. My theater journey has been really, really weird. I also did theater from a young age. I did theater in high school. I went to art school from like 6th through 12th grade. I did theater there. And I theatered myself out, right? So I was like, for college, I don't want to do that. I want to go into film. And then in film school, I burnt myself out there too. And it kind of made me realize, like, you know, I was really happy doing theater. I think I did need a break, but I do want to return to it. And I think, you know, it was very fulfilling to me. It makes me really happy. I think, you know, there will always be theater in my heart. So, you know, this was a great opportunity to kind of go back to that world and try it out again. And, you know, I just kind of met everyone because me and Jack Aschenbach started dating about 2 years ago. And he introduced me to Jack Yateman and, you know, Liam and Lucas and like basically everyone. I didn't meet Andrew and Liam until the show. I just kind of took everyone's word for it that they were good, and they were amazing. So I met Jack through that. And, you know, he's an actor. He works professionally. I directed him in a couple of my films, which was really fun. And then I also helped him with a few of his monologues, and he was preparing for auditions. And he pointed out to me, like, you know, like, oh, you know, you're good at this. You have a really good instinct for this. And, you know, that was very validating, but it also made me realize, like, you know, I really do have a passion for theater. It's something I want to return to. And, you know, this experience was so validating for that, because it made me realize, like, this is definitely something I want to continue doing. And it was just like, it was the best time ever. I had the greatest time.
I think that's one of my favorite aspects about theater is this sense of being able to return to it. I don't think it's a field that really you need to do every season of the year, for example, right? Like you can do like one show or come back to it. And sometimes it's actually really refreshing to step away from theater for a while and come back to it like with a new set of eyes. So I like how flexible it can be, but then there's that lack of, you know, consistency, right? Because then you have to kind of constantly be adding energy to it and making sure that like things are lined up, because I mean, there's just so much logistical things to be figuring out. What were some of the logistics that you guys had to, because I know you were talking about having to figure out space, right? Like that originally was in a backyard. And there's so much problem solving. What were some of the things that you encountered in producing this production?
Space was definitely tough. We got the Rockwell just by virtue of Jack like literally just walking around to different theaters and like asking in person. And the Rockwell, you know, they were very generous and, you know, open to like us having no like prior shows or experience. So like that was, you know, it was tough. It felt like we were kind of just like thrown in, you know, and when we got the Rockwell, it made us realize like, oh shit, like we're actually doing a show. Like, you know, this is for real. We got to do it.
It felt like something we really had to take serious.
Exactly.
Although also still having fun.
Oh yeah, definitely. Definitely. I think, logistic wise, scheduling was tough just cause like, you know, we're not like an equity house or anything. We can't really, we couldn't pay people for their time, unfortunately. That's something we'd like to be able to do in the future. But for this show, you know, everyone was just kind of volunteering their time and, you know, coming when they could. And, you know, it's tough because like, you know, Andrew is a day job. Like I'm a student in school. Everyone else works in restaurants with like inconsistent schedules. So like,
as I'm leaving work, everyone else is going to work. So
yeah, exactly.
It makes it really fun for scheduling.
Yeah, exactly. And like, so that was just tough, making sure that like we could get everyone in the room at the same time. But like it ended up working out fine. I think it was just a headache to do.
It's a testament to how much we wanted to do it. I mean, I was asking my bosses if I could take time off and leaving work for like an hour or two during the day to like drive to Somerville and like rehearse for a little bit just to try to keep things going and keep things fresh, and doing like line throughs by myself at my house, like trying to keep things fresh in my mind when I couldn't go to like their day rehearsals or if they weren't free at night. But the weekends were really when we were the most productive, because we started to get weekends in the Rockwell actually to rehearse during the day, which was amazing, just to be like in the actual space.
It made such a huge difference.
Yeah.
It was crazy. Like rehearsing in a living room, it's fun for like a little bit. You feel like a Renaissance troupe or something, and then you realize like, oh my God, there's no space and there's no lights and this sucks.
Yeah, it is nice. I mean, it does, like, it teaches you, especially with the previous show I did, we had to rehearse in a lot of different spaces, and essentially wherever we had time and space to do it, we just had to do it. And that is helpful because it makes the body, it makes the show really organic in your own body, and you can sort of do it wherever. But at the same time, I mean, being in the space where you're actually going to have people staring at you is very nice. Get yourself used to that feeling, I guess.
Yeah. Like going back and forth between different spaces, from a directorial perspective was also tough because like, you know, we would block scenes in living rooms and then we would go to the Rockwell like later in the week, and then we would find like we have to adjust the blocking, or like we thought it would work in this space and in this space it doesn't look good at all, you know? So like it does feel like you're losing time, but at the same time it's like, you know, it's a push and pull of like, you know, how much are we going to get done? How useful is this? Because we did get to a point where like we realized like rehearsing in living rooms just isn't helpful for us anymore, and like we have to stay in the space. But you know, that took us a while to get there. I'm trying to think what other stuff gave us a headache? Like printing programs was a nightmare.
Getting our programs, securing the rights to do the show, just like things that you kind of thought were part of the process, but when actually like confronted with it directly, like we don't have our theater department to help us with the red tape anymore, and we don't have like a manager that's helping us with all of this. Like that was the point where it truly felt like, oh, this is us as like a group of misfits essentially just putting on an actual show, and like these are the things that have to be done and the stuff that we have to take care of, and we're still coming into contact with things like that as we're continuing on, but it's fun.
Yeah, the rights thing was such a pain in the ass because like I don't know why, like
it's a Beckett play too, right? So you got the writer as well.
yeah so like I don't know why we thought this, but it was like, you know, the last thing on our minds was buying the rights for some reason. And I guess we just kind of figured it was a thing of like, we pay them. It's a one and done thing. I know that like there are certain requirements, like, you know, no women allowed, I guess, but like, fuck that.
Yeah, for real.
Yeah, like seriously, I don't care. But like we bought the rights, and then we found out that apparently like part of the agreement is that you have to buy scripts from like that press that issues the rights, right? And if you're not using those scripts they issue you, they can sue you and shut your production down. And at first we were like, like, fuck it, who cares? And then we learned that like the steward for like the Beckett Society lives in Cambridge.
You're like, oh, so there's a chance he might see this.
Yeah, exactly. And then I think it was Wes, their old professor from Suffolk.
Wes Savick, yeah.
Wes Savick. Very, very nice guy. He came and he saw the show, and then like afterwards he was talking to me about it, and he brought up the rights thing too. And he was like, wow, like that was so like brave of you guys to like change the stage directions like that. Like you guys could really get in trouble. And I'm like, what? This is the first time I'm hearing of this. This is like night 3 of the show. What's going on?
Right. Yeah. I guess, you know, the Beckett estate's a little bit like the Albee estate, in which like they're one of the more litigious. But I have,
which is crazy. I feel like, I don't know. He's so dead. He's been dead for so long. Like,
yeah. And like, there's a part of me, and I'd like to touch on this a little bit more later, that found the purism like really interesting, but then you see it like play out in time, and it's like shutting down Black productions of it or queer productions of it. And it's like, oh man,
do people really do that?
I don't think it happens too frequently anymore. The
That's
general vibe I got was that there were times in which, like, particularly when he was alive, and I think that his nephew Edward was a little bit more involved in this. But yeah, like there'd be shows, and usually there were like shows in like recognized theaters, right? Like, so a repertory theater or something like that. I think that's a little bit more on their radar than like community theater, for example.
Well, yeah, that makes sense.
So that's the general sense I got, but I too wasn't really sure about like, because I did Endgame for Martian Radio Theater. That was the last live production that we did. And during the production of that was just sort of wrestling with the reality of it. It's like, what are the chances? Like, seriously? Like, I don't think that's going to be an issue. And what choices would be seen? Because I want to change like some of the words so that some of the Nels lines were French instead of English. I was that seems like a legit, like, because the original plays were written in French. So it's like, maybe that, kind of
excusable.
Yeah, forgivable and navigable. But yeah, it's definitely one of the odder plays that comes with a lot more baggage behind it as well. And you wouldn't think so because it's such a minimal, simple play.
Right. And I feel like a huge part of the text is that it is so open to interpretation, and it's supposed to represent kind of like a universal human experience. I feel like if you're going to be so specific about like the kinds of people and the kinds of productions that can be put out there, I feel like that's undermining kind of the point of the work. Not to get on like a soapbox about it, but like, especially like with queer interpretations, I feel like, how can you not have a queer reading of Waiting for Godot? I don't understand that.
I mean, Estragon and Vladimir are pretty gay.
Yeah, exactly. Like, and we leaned into that into the show. And like, we talked about it and we joked about it and stuff. But like, I think I have heard of productions like fully leaning into that and like making it fully like romantic. And I totally dig that. I think it's valid interpretation. I'd love to see it. It's sad that people or I guess the Beckett estate is so gatekeepy about it,
Yeah, absolutely. And before we dive more into Waiting for Godot, I wanted to get a sense of your thoughts on the Boston theater scene. Do you have a way to characterize it? I know you were talking about being in New York for a while, so perhaps you have like better senses of different like regions in Massachusetts. But what are your thoughts on the Boston theater scene?
You'd know more about that.
It's very. I mean, I fell out of it for a few years, and when I was really in it, it was mostly at Suffolk. But Boston itself is like a small town, big city anyway. So any community you're in, like I've recently got into like the indie music scene writing for alstonpudding.com, and my plug for them. And it's so easy to sort of see the same bands and see the same people. And with theater, it's so easy to see the same artists everywhere and the same names and people on posters. And there's a few theater companies, but there's not a ton. And so there's a really good chance that someone working for one has worked, if not for all of them, for at least a few others. And there's always new ones emerging all the time. Like, with Deadword just sort of coming out of nowhere, and recently with like White Stakes projects and everything. And so it's very DIY, I guess. It's very like, it doesn't have the same sort of intimidating feeling as like a New York does. And also we're just not even close to the size of New York, obviously. But yeah, as someone who hasn't really been in the theater scene very much, but my little experience is that it's a good community. It's a strong community, and the people know each other, and it's easy to sort of, not easy, but I guess it's easier to make those connections and to build those relationships, I guess.
You just had your first show at the Rockwell in Somerville, Mass. Can you tell us a bit about the piece you chose to produce? We were referencing it earlier, but I don't think we really fully engaged what Waiting for Godot is.
A basic description of it, it's an existential drama about two friends, Vladimir and Estragon, as they wait for this character named Godot, who you never hear about. And they're waiting for him to arrive, kind of trying to pass the time as they do. And it's kind of play exploring, at least the way I view it, just, how we choose to pass the time with our lives, I feel like the play is very much inspired by like modernist literature from the 20s and 30s. I know Beckett was very much inspired by like James Joyce and Ulysses, which is another work that I absolutely love. And I think a common theme in those works is like they're very, how do I put it? Aesthetically, I feel like they're confusing. They have a lot of like angst and frustration, a lot of large questions about like our place in the world, and kind of I guess that's all I have to say about it. It's an existentialist drama. The less you know about it, the better, to be honest. I would recommend, if you're interested in looking into it, watching a production as opposed to reading it.
Yeah.
Or even like watching a production and then like reading along in a PDF or a script. Just because it really is one of those shows where like reading it does not do it justice. The dialogue's designed to be repetitive and boring, and kind of all over the place and difficult to follow.
Yeah.
Which is why I think each production of it is so unique, because you get to see how different directors and productions like interpret it. And, you know, no two productions are going to be alike. Each production is going to be unique. I think that's what's so special about it. And kind of with all of Beckett's work, but I think especially this one.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that it's so funny how like dry the language is, but then like you get into the stage directions and pointed out that there's so much physicality to it. It's actually very like slapsticky. I mean, even the like visual motifs of, you know, two tramps with their like hats and, you know, just falling around the stage and whatnot. It's just very like Buster Keaton, Charlie Chaplin, silent movie-esque.
Well, like, yeah, me and Jack were talking about this last night, actually, because we were, I was mentioning like a TikTok I saw of a mascot falling down that made me laugh really hard. And I said, like, I don't know why, like, it doesn't matter how old I get or how mature I think I am. Like, someone falling down in a funny way is always going to fucking have me rolling on the floor. And then Jack pointed out, like, well, that's all Godot is. It's just like people
Physical
falling
comedy.
down funny in different ways and kind of, you know, distracting people from the existential boredom. And sorry to go off on a tangent, but like when I started Godot, I watched Jean Daleman around the same time, which was recently voted like the best film of all time by Sight and Sound, overtaking Citizen Kane and Vertigo. If you haven't seen it, wonderful movie. It's 3 hours long. It is hard to watch, but it's totally worth it. But that film, I think that approach kind of inspired the way I kind of took my approach with Godot as well, because the film's about a housewife in Brussels, and she's kind of depressed and like losing her mind to boredom. And the way that they kind of convey that is by just having these like long shots where you're just sitting in the room with John and feeling that boredom. And it kind of, in doing that, it creates this environment where like you are becoming one with the protagonist, losing your mind with her, you know? And I think Godot kind of operates in the same way. Like you are kind of losing your mind with Vladimir and Estragon. You are relishing into the distractions the same way that they are, to the point where like by the time the play ends, I feel like if it's done right, you are so at one with them that you feel all of the heartbreak that they feel when, I guess, spoilers for this really, really old play, but when Godot does not arrive finally, it really is just heartbreaking. So if that makes any sense at all, I think really just what I love about this play is just its ability to really make you, I don't know, empathize with it. Just like really, you feel like you're in the play in a way that I think is really hard to accomplish. And it's able to do that just through text and staging alone. And yeah, that's all I'll say.
Absolutely.
Can you repeat the question again? I'm just like trying to remember where we were coming from.
Yeah, well, actually, I'll go ahead and break off from it. Andrew, I'm curious about what your initial reactions to the text. I know that you were exposed to the text in high school or perhaps college.
I read it in college, yeah.
Yeah. And so what was it like kind of coming back to this and your initial reactions to it?
I mean, like what Charlie was saying, it's not, and I believe this for most plays, but it's not a play where you should read it necessarily. It's a great starting point and it kind of gives you an idea, but it is such a strange text. Especially, I guess, focusing like at one point on Lucky's monologue. I mean, it is designed to not really make sense and to not really have a point, while I guess dancing around a giant point that the whole show is going around, which is faith or God or sticking to something when there's no real sign as to why you're doing that. Like they come back to this place every single day, and they wait for someone. And I think part of themselves even knows that he's never going to show up, but just the idea that he could is so interesting and so like beautiful to them that they will just waste their entire lives just sort of waiting for this person, this thing that never really materializes. And reading it obviously is one thing. And when Jack had approached me about doing the show, it excited me because we did a lot of physical comedy in college. We did, I guess one example was doing this Pirandello, maybe Pirandello? No, that's wrong. But it was a old like Italian clown play called The Servant of Two Masters. And it was super physical. And it was the most fun I had in college because it was very silly. And I grew up with my dad watching like Monty Python, and eventually you got into like Judd Apatow movies, which were super physical and just really fun and slapstick, and showed me that like, yes, comedy can be like telling a joke, but it's also like the way that you present yourself and just like the situations you put yourself into. And so hearing that Jack and Jack were going to be doing this show, it was amazing because it makes perfect sense for the two of them to be Vladimir and Estragon. They are in some ways those characters in real life.
Yes, they are.
Which there was points throughout this production where I was like, this is cast really well, because I unfortunately have some relations to my character Pazzo, and Jack and Jack have definite similarities to Vladimir and Estragon. They're not tramps sitting on mounds of dirt by any means, but
I don't know about that. But
the physical comedy came easy to us, I suppose. And it was really fun to fully lean into that with this production, because we've heard of productions where people have been buried up to like their necks in sand and like just like focusing so purely on trying to figure out what the text means. And it's not that we tried to avoid that, but it was, we tried to tell the story of the text, but also like focus on what they could be physically doing. Like these conversations are very strange and they're very meandering, and there's really no point to some of them at times. And it's like, well, we wouldn't really be just like sitting there all day and like chatting about all this stuff. Like we would be finding ways to pass the time. And that comes with physical bits and activities, and in some cases dancing and tearing into chicken carcasses. And, you know.
We brainstormed so many ways to have you eat that chicken. It was so funny.
It was fun, and ultimately, just sort of miming it became the best way.
Yeah.
But that just also led itself to exploring purely physical things. I mean, we did have a lot of props, but it was very much just sort of like creating an entire world physically with a tree and a stump.
Yeah.
Really.
Yeah.
The play has so many comedic elements to it, right? Mm-hmm. There's this slapstick tomfoolery that's happened all the time, this physical comedy between all four characters in the show. But there's also this sort of existential dread that happens. Do you have thoughts on sort of the balance between like this tragic comedy of like how tragic it is versus how comedic it is?
Yeah, I mean, that was something that we talked about a lot. There were a lot of moments where we had to decide, like, okay, do we want to play this lightly or do we want this to be like a real moment? Kind of the general structure that we had, and we talked about this like from the very beginning, is we wanted most of the comedy to be focused and like front loaded into Act 1. And then, kind of tease that like existential dread a little bit in Act 1, and then Act 2 kind of focus more on those heavier dramatic moments and kind of interrupt them with comedy. And then by the end of the play, there's just like no hope. I think, structuring it like kind of, I guess, plotting out those beats like temporally, is that a word? Temporally? Mm-hmm. I think that helped us kind of have like a bigger picture of like, all right, this is the like larger narrative that we're telling. So I think that was a good way to approach it. But definitely, I think what was interesting is that I think the comedy landed harder in Act 2 than it did in Act 1. And I think we talked about this like every show, where we found that people didn't like not like the jokes in Act 1. I feel like we needed all of that comedy in act 1 so that the audience buys in. And then by act 2, they're fully into it and they're like willing to accept kind of the ridiculousness of the situation, if that makes sense.
That was certainly my experience of it, where I felt like with the first act, it just had me so warmed up by the second that even I found myself oscillating a lot faster between like, whoa, this is heavy, and oh man, that was fun, you know, as opposed to like perhaps if I was given that whiplash in the beginning, perhaps it'd be a little bit more jarring to go back and forth between dread and lightness. So I think it was certainly effective for me. I know that it left me, you were talking about like no hope at the end. I definitely felt that punch, you know, of like, you know, the lights go down and you're like, oh, and my partner was actually like, I'm going to take a walk around the block a couple times.
Oh my God.
I just sort of like walked this off a little bit. So it was very well constructed. And I was apprehensive because I'm such a big Beckett fan that sometimes like when I go to a show, I'm like, okay, I hope I like it. You know, I don't want to be too critical of it. And I was really, really like quite excited of it. You know, it was the first time I felt like really compelled to, you know, kind of review a piece and hope that others go see it. And like, so just from a personal standpoint, I was just super excited about it as a whole.
And thank you for reviewing the show, by the way. Your review was like very kind, and it was just so humbling to know that like, yeah, people are like interested in our work and want to see it. And like, I think the most important thing to us was that like people come out and see it, and that, you know, people enjoy it, but not just like that people as a whole enjoy it, but like, you know, people kind of like us, like in our age group that are also into art, that, you know, just enjoy contributing to the community. So it's so nice to hear that people like it.
Yeah. I think this actually like is a play that really kind of fits well in our time. You know, there's so much like kind of existential awareness and kind of, you know, not necessarily nihilism, but there is this sense of like, what are we doing? You know,
Definitely.
Yeah. No, I mean, we as a generation definitely love to make really dark jokes, and we have constant reminders of how dark the world is every day, and we've all had to grow up around that. But I think just like a common thread with our generation is that we just have a very interesting sense of humor, and like you said, with this being a good piece for right now, I mean, it lends itself to very sort of like quick-witted, fun, like little snippets of jokes, which we're all very accustomed to now with like TikTok and Twitter and everything. It's so like easily and quickly digested. And so like when people would ask me like, oh, what is this show about? It was hard to explain. And I would really just be like, it's two people waiting for somebody, but really just watch them. Just like, I mean, especially with the way that we structured and built the show being so physical, it was just like, just enjoy it. Like just watch what they're doing and take in what you can. We definitely had people being like, oh, like I saw it like twice, and like the second time it was great because like the physical bits and everything were still there, but you were able to like dig a little bit deeper into what they were really going through.
Yeah. And I think comparing, like, I don't know, I like looking at the styles of humor across different productions of Godot, just because like I watched a fuck ton of them to prepare. And I feel like in kind of older, more like traditional, quote unquote, like productions of Godot, the humor is definitely there. It's just like, it's really dry. It's very subtle. It's like clever, you know what I mean? And I don't mean clever in a derogatory way. But I feel like with ours, the humor, it was a little more like, we did have like dry humor every now and then, but the humor was a little more like zany. It was more physical. It was like
silly. Yeah,
it was silly. It was goofy. And I think like that's something that I think is very characteristic of like kind of our generation and our age group. I think, you know, kind of the younger generation right now is like, you know, has this really like kind of nihilistic, surreal, zany sense of humor. And I think that's why it kind of resonated with people, you know?
Yeah.
Was there anything else you did to kind of bridge that gap between contemporary viewers and the show itself? One thing that pops to mind is I felt like I noticed some references. I think at one point I was like, wait, is that the Rugrats theme song that I hear?
Oh
like,
my God.
So we definitely had the Parent Trap music in there.
Yeah, we did.
Had, I don't even know. So it's funny with my character specifically, I guess we'll get further into that, I guess. But I the way that I functioned on stage was I didn't really concern myself with the other characters very much. And so I wouldn't see a lot of the bits that especially like Liam was doing, because his character being sort of my like subservient, like my subordinate.
Yeah, let's actually set up your character a little bit. So the play starts off with these two characters, Vladimir and Estragon, and they're just talking to each other constantly. And then you come in. Would you mind kind of talking about your entry into the show?
Yes, that is very much exactly what happens. They are chatting, and I just sort of show up, and we go from there. I may or may not own the land that they are on. I may or may not be a person of power. I may or may not just be a vagrant megalomaniac. It's sort of left up to interpretation. I'm sure people have come to very specific places as to where Pozzo comes from.
Pozzo.
Sorry, don't offend myself. And yeah, but for me, it was fun to just sort of play around with this idea of a person who thinks very highly of themselves, but may have no real reason to. But for some reason has this slave, I suppose, that they just sort of guide around all day and bark orders at, and eventually have them entertain me in random ways. And yeah, it was a really fun character to explore, because it did lend itself to just sort of being bombastic and misguided and full of myself, which is a really fun thing to play around with. Yeah, and the physicality came really easily through that character, especially being such like a towering, bumbling figure.
Yeah, it does seem to be an archetype that I see in Beckett's plays a lot, and especially this dynamic of like a master and a slave.
Definitely.
In Endgame, there's like Ham, and he just like tells Clove, like his slave, to just like walk around the room and pretty much do everything. And then like his senses are also deteriorating, so there's the sense of like, I need you, like for to continue and exercise my power and whatnot.
I do feel like Endgame is like it's basically Godot, but from the point of view of Pozzo and Lucky, with Vladimir and Estragon being like the side characters. And I've only read Endgame like once or twice, so it's been a while, so like I might be wrong. But I do think, like, I wonder why he was so interested in that dynamic specifically, you know? I
hear theories, and then I hear them contradicted, so I'm never sure which ones are sort of correct. But you know, we were talking about Ulysses and James Joyce. I heard on one account that Beckett was Joyce's assistant, and that as Joyce was losing his eyesight, he would just tell Beckett what to do, or like, you know, pretty much boss him around in the same ways.
Oh shit! Wow.
But I hear another account in which like Beckett was more of a closer to a peer than not. And it was interesting. One line that comes to mind is James Joyce's daughter, I believe it was, asked him out on a date to go to the theater. And Samuel Beckett's response was basically like, oh, I can't. I'm sort of dead inside, and I don't have feelings like other people do. So kind of an interesting way to get rejected from.
Wait, that's exactly what I would expect him to say. Yeah. Sorry, I can't go out with you. I just hate myself too much, and I can't.
Yeah. Sorry, I didn't make it. I just didn't want to go.
And then later sort of apologize, like there's probably a better way to communicate that.
That's hella funny.
But there is that sense of it. And then there's also, I mean, I used to be really interested in that he was in the French Resistance, but I've heard since then that he'd even consider himself like that large a part of the French Resistance. Like when Germany was occupying France at the time, like there was a priest who knew that he was pretty much like a courier. That was his primary role. And then he was found out, and he fled into the hills, or the, you know, kind of farmland area, and was just in a room for a very long time, you know, hiding. So some of that waiting, that makes sense.
Well, I know, I remember reading that like his experience that inspired Waiting for Godot, was kind of based on like waiting to receive or give information to like, you know, like other comrades in the resistance, basically, which I totally buy. And like, I definitely think that sense of like, oh, like, is what we're doing even worth it? That definitely comes through. But it's interesting that like, it turns out he might not have even been a part of it. I totally buy that he maybe exaggerated his role.
Yeah. I think and it's one of the things about like interpreting history, right? There's so much ambiguity to navigate and contradictory accounts. But one other thing that I liked hearing was just this. I think a popular interpretation is like they're waiting for God, right? Like God, but I forget what the alternative translation for Godot was, but I think it was something to the effect of letters, right? Or correspondence. And that it is waiting for some sort of message to come through, perhaps for a similar function. So when I hear you say that, that's what pops to mind, you know?
Wow, I didn't know that. That's crazy. I think, and that's interesting that you bring that up because like that was kind of a conflict I had when I was trying to figure out how to direct it, which was like, you know, you're always wondering like, is my approach going to be just to like research the fuck out of it and see like what has every single person done before so I can make sure I'm not repeating them, and I need to know every single thing about this play and Samuel Beckett before I can even start. And I think there are certainly some plays where you do have to do that, but I don't think this is one of them, which I think is really interesting because it's known as being such this like hard, challenging piece, but at the end of the day what helped most was just like rehearsing it over and over again and reading it over and over again, just like returning to the text, you know? So I think it's interesting to see like how, you know, having context can help, but sometimes it can also be a hindrance.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. Because like this play, I mean, it's so natural. It's just like on the page. Like there's no real like I mean, like there is some history that you can look into to influence it, but everything you need is on there, which is why I'm so surprised that it has such a purist, you know, form, and that Beckett is such a purist when it comes to productions of it. It makes me think like if he wants that much control over a piece of work, he should stick to a novel or something, you know, something that where you can really solidify it, because theater is so interpretive, right? And tends to mutate and change over time. So this idea of trying to have this pure crystal thing in the theater industry, and like it's ambitious, right?
It's also just like boring. To
Exactly.
At a certain point, like you don't want to just continue seeing. Maybe you do, but you don't want to just continue seeing Vladimir and Estragon just doing the same exact thing over and over again. Like maybe you want to see them do the handshake from the Parent Trap in the middle of avoiding helping Pozzo on the ground. Right. Like could be fun.
I think and that's also interesting to me, just because like if you wanted that much control over the show, the stage directions are very vague. It just says like they move, they run, they dance.
It lends itself to a lot of interpretation. So it is funny that it's held in such a regard.
Right. Like I agree. Like with Andrew, you know, it's boring. Why should we be doing theater the way that people have been doing it for decades, you know?
Another thing that came to mind was it's kind of funny. We're at the cultural moment we are at where it's kind of easier to explain like a multiverse movie where it's like, oh, you know, there's parallel universes and this woman is traveling through them and she wears a headset and people could be like, oh yeah, okay, I kind of get that, you know, and it has like references. And then when you talk about a story, it's like, oh, it's two people waiting.
You're like, so what else?
Yeah, they're like, what?
Well, maybe nothing.
Yeah. Well, and it's like not to bring up John Dellman again, but I think it's a good comparison because like it's another work that's looked at as being inaccessible and hard to describe. And when you watch it, you're like, it's just like a woman sitting there. Or like you watch this play and you're like, it's just two people waiting. But it's like, you know, it's a play that almost like transcends the need for plot. It's not about the plot. Yeah. It's about the journey, you know? I think it's special.
Which I kind of just want to like mirror this with a recent experience was I had the opportunity to go to the Edinburgh Fringe Festival this past year, and there was a show that Liam, who's in Godot with us, he was there with me as well. He was hyping up this show, and he told us the name, and it's literally like man dressed as a gorilla, sits on a rocking chair for 56 minutes, and then gets up and leaves. And we were like, do we really want to be using up our like precious Scotland time to like go see this hour-long show of nothing? And honestly, I would go back in a heartbeat. It was such a beautiful, weird, unique experience of where the show was the audience. Like, this man comes out on stage and sits in a chair, and that's all. And he has a pipe, and he's dressed like an old man in Scotland, but in a gorilla costume.
Okay.
And he just kind of rocks back and forth slowly. It takes him a very long time to finish his complete first rock. But his hat would fall off, or people would come up and give him a beer. People would come up and take selfies with him. People would forcibly remove the person taking a selfie with him. But everything that was happening was fully organic. Like, the only thing that was actually rehearsed was a man sitting on a chair.
Oh, wow.
Everything that happened in that room was just by will of the audience responding to the nothing happening on stage. And it turned into this beautiful cacophony of like people synchronizing phrases and reactions and building bits in real time with like complete strangers in this room, just because we're all drinking in a basement watching a man do nothing for an hour. And it was great. And that sort of feeling was very similar to how we were doing Godot, which is like, I mean, just enjoy it and just experience like what's going on, and yes, get bogged down in the details because everything is beautiful and surreal and crazy and strange, but at the same time, just enjoy the monotony and the absurdity of what's going on.
Yeah, exactly.
Seems to be such a creative challenge for producing new or alternative pieces. The idea of knowing you want to take an audience someplace, right? But then you have to sort of have like, you don't need to have, but some sort of way to communicate that to people who aren't initiated, so that they come into the space with a certain orientation, or like, I'm trying to think of like, you know, how do you pitch that to people? You know, it's like, how do you make them see like that's a experience that they want to try out or play with, right?
Yeah.
And getting people to that sense of play without a byline that feels like very formulaic or conventional of like, I can't think of one off the top of my head, but you know, I'm picturing like a, you know, Fast and Furious or something that kind of plays by the books.
Right. I think luckily for us, Godot has like history. So, you know, even if you haven't heard of it, you can like Google it and figure out what it is, you know, and like a lot of people, even if they haven't read it or don't know what it's about, have at least like heard of Waiting for Godot and Samuel Beckett, which fortunately I think does a lot of heavy lifting for us. But I think kind of the approach with like marketing it, if you call it that, is just, we weren't necessarily pitching the show. We were kind of pitching the idea of like, we're a brand new theater company and we want to get people involved and we would love for you to see our show. And we kind of did that through a combination of like social media stuff, obviously, but it was a lot of just like, you know, me and Jack would just walk around to like different spots in Davis Square and like give them our poster and say like, hey, come see our show. And, you know, like, or hand out little postcards to people just to like make that personal connection. I don't know if this answers your question per se, but I think, you know, what excited people about the show was the fact that like, you know, we were community artists and we wanted to involve them. And I think that kind of allowed them to buy into the harder sell of the show. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. Like investing in you guys as artists and a community over content. I think that's super valuable.
Yeah, and I think it speaks to the strength of the text, because like there were so many people who would come that I knew were just supporting us, but I knew like they're not really a theater person. I don't know if this is going to be their thing. And they would leave and they'd be like, oh my God, like I loved it. Like I want to read it when I get home. I want to read other Beckett plays. And like, that's exactly the outcome we wanted to have.
Like the way we treated the text really made it easier to sell it to people, especially if they weren't such theater heads. Like, I mean, I work in HR, so trying to sell this to a bunch of like cubicle corporate people is very interesting because for some of them, it was their first time seeing me perform. So it was very weird to sort of explain like, oh, well, like as long as you like comedy and like slapstick humor and like stuff in that sort of vein, like you should enjoy this. Because I knew that if I just sort of went around telling people like, oh, like people who don't know anything about theater, like if they were to just Google Waiting for Godot, like that could give them an entirely different notion as to what they're doing, and it might not excite them at all. But the way that we chose to build this show just made that a little bit easier, made it a little more accessible, I guess, while still honoring and treating the more accurate and I guess historic respected parts of the text as well.
I think part of the freedom of like not being like a professional theater company or like a repertory doing this is like, you know, we didn't have any expectations for us, you know, like no one had heard of us before. This was our first show. So I really felt like we had the freedom to kind of build it into whatever we wanted it to be.
Yeah.
You know, like we could decide the shape of the show. And I think instead of worrying about like, you know, are we portraying the text in like the best, most like theater way? It was more about like, well, let's present this text in the way that we interpret it and that makes sense to us. Because chances are, if we resonate with it for these reasons, then so will other people.
Mm-hmm. Now, I just have a couple more questions for you guys. My second to last one is, how would you like to see Deadword Theatre grow and change? At Slash, how would you like to see sort of like the general theater scene grow and change?
You wanna start?
Sure. I guess starting with the general theater scene, my biggest, not so much complaint, but just like gripe with the way that theater is seen is that it's kind of elitist and it's not accessible to a lot of people because it's expensive or it's pretentious or it's very artsy and cerebral, which it can be. But I liked trying to sort of just sell this show to like the common person, to just like anybody that enjoys laughing or that enjoys having a good time or like pondering the existence of life and then chuckling at something. I mean, that's anyone can enjoy that. So I would love to see theater continue, which in some ways, especially now with COVID and everything, it kind of feels like we took a few steps back in that regard. But I would love to see theater just be more accessible and more mainstream and more of like a common conversation. Because I mean, like the Oscars, the Emmys, those are very like mainstream topics for everyone. Whereas the whole season of the Tonys can come and go for whole communities of people and they would have no idea that it even happened. So I would love for theater to be like film and TV and music, where it is just like one of the main figures of the conversation whenever creative entertainment comes up. And I guess specifically relating to Deadword, I would like to keep working. So I would love to keep acting. Having this opportunity to just sort of not necessarily have to audition for a show is incredible, because that is probably the worst part of being in shows, is finding the work and securing the work. So continuing to do stuff in any way, and also in that regard, like really being able to do whatever we want. Like, sure, we did a 2.5 hour straight play, but like we could do a musical, we could do a festival, we could do a showcase, we could do little bits, we could do a staged reading, we could do anything, because we aren't really anything yet. I mean, we're something, but we don't really know exactly what we are. We are a theater company. We are a group of people that want to do stuff, and we're hungry and we're passionate and we have big dreams and hopes, but yeah, we'll see. We'll see what happens.
Yeah, I think definitely I would love Deadword to continue doing productions. I know, like, concretely, we would love to kind of secure our own space in the next 5 years or so. We're already looking into kind of securing like sponsors and donors and, you know, people to kind of help contribute and keep us going. And it's crazy that like people even want to do that and are in conversation with us. We will be putting up Godot again in October at the Modern Theater.
So I didn't want to say that because I was like, I don't know if this is like a thing we can say yet.
Oh, but can we say that?
I believe so.
I mean,
whether or not the specific date is nailed down, we will be performing the show again.
Yes, we will, at the Modern Theater, which is insane. And we are planning another show in the fall. I know right now we're talking about No Exit, but we will see. It's nothing set in stone right now.
Oh, hell yeah.
But I love No Exit. I would be very, very down for that.
There was just like, there's a short list of shows that came into mind because they were inherently kind of similar to Godot, which was No Exit and Rosencrantz and Guildenstern Are Dead, and just these sort of shows that lend themselves to being slapstick and weird, but at the same time very like existential and
crazy
and disturbing, which may or may not become our brand. So
I love that for us though. I think another thing we talked about doing kind of in between our larger shows is kind of like shorter, more like festival kind of things.
I mean, there's
like kind of, we talked about doing like double feature shows. So like instead of one big show, we do like one weekend run of like 2 original 1-act plays by local artists, and just to kind of get as much people involved as possible and like get as many artists in, and like not just in terms of getting actors involved, but like, getting artists involved to design our programs and our costumes, getting musicians involved to do like pre-show stuff. Like, I think.
And I guess going back to like the sort of topic of the community in Boston, theater wise, and music and everything, it was a really amazing sign of that, because literally like after we opened, even just later that weekend, they were saying like, oh yeah, we're getting messages from people on like our Instagram, just being like, oh, I saw the show. I live around here. I would love to be a part of it. Let me know like what's going on. And just sort of like immediately having people willing to throw themselves into it and to like trust us with being their like creative hosts and partners and stuff is really amazing.
Yeah, it's nuts. And I think kind of speaking to your point about kind of the gatekeeping in the theater community, I think what I'd really love to see like on a wider scale is just like more people experimenting, like more people doing what we're doing. I'd love to see like other random small theater companies like come up and do weird shows, and I'd love to see them. And I would love for our like common perception of theater to go past just like Broadway musicals. I feel like that's all like, your like mom and dad and your grandma
Theater
are probably going to
anything.
think of like, Wicked and Phantom and stuff.
Yeah.
And I think, a larger goal we have is to show that like, no, like theater is not this like unattainable, like, very highly polished, expensive thing that only a few people can access. It's something that, has everything to do with our everyday lives. And I think everyone can find something to enjoy in theater.
And anyone can just start it. I mean, that
Exactly.
was like, that was the big thing with our professors when they came to see the show from Suffolk was the way that they sort of taught us to be theater artists was to do everything. I know a lot of theater programs, you're very specifically an actor, you're a director or a writer or something production wise. Suffolk, as a prerequisite, you had to take everything. So you had to do stagecraft, we had to do playwriting or directing, you had to do lighting or sound, you had to dabble into costuming, you had to do something. You had to, like, if you were an actor, you had to at some point do production, or if you were vice versa. And that was great because it gave us all the opportunity, all the knowledge to sort of put everything up, because we knew kind of everything that went into it. And they would tell us like, oh yeah, like if you don't have the opportunities, like make your own. And it was something that I think everyone's just afraid to jump in and just do. And we were afraid to do that also. And there was apprehension, but I think what kept us going was just seeing how not easy it was, but how it was possible, like how it was possible for us to find a space, and it was possible for us to secure upwards of a few $1,000s from people just willing to donate. I mean, you can sit there and be like, oh, we don't really want to ask people for money, but like, why not? People have money and they're spending money on stupid shit all the time. Why not just like have us, spend money on your friends putting on a theater show?
Yeah.
It'd be great. And they did. And some people even sent us a lot more than that. And yeah, I mean, just like not being afraid to do it. And if we can just sort of like impart that wisdom to make it more accessible and to just be like, sure, like, just like, if you don't see what you want to do, like just try to do it yourself. And I guess going forward, that's what we'll kind of try to encourage with people is like, just reach out, see if you like want to join us, or if you want to like have fun and like explore something. And if we can, amazing. And if not, then like take a tip from us and just try to do it yourself.
Right. Or at the very least, like if you have any shows that you want like people to see, tell us and we will come and see them.
Yeah.
Like I don't know. I think, what was I going to say? Like beginning is the hardest part, and I think Stanley Kubrick had this mantra, not me being a film kid quoting Kubrick in a podcast, but he had this mantra where he talked about how like if he believed if he wanted to see something on screen, then chances are somebody else would want to see something on screen. I feel like that's just a good kind of way to look at all art. Like if there's something that's interesting to you that you think is valuable and worth it, then like people are going to want to see it. And I cannot understate the importance of just like going out and like talking to people about the show, because like I think that made the biggest difference, is the fact that like we just went up to so many people and said like, we're doing the show, we would love you to be there, just to like remind people that like this is the main goal. We just want people to see the work.
Yeah, and there were challenges along the way, but it was I guess just echoing what I had previously said, it was great to see that there were ways to get through them.
I love so much of what you guys are saying. And I think it kind of, it's reminded me of some of your critiques with the film industry that I also share, which is that when it's like heavily, industrialized, there's this sense of return on investment, playing it safe, following conventions, and that we can kind of create new formulas or new approaches and try and make it as feasible as possible. While also trying to live our lives and get our paychecks and whatnot.
Yeah, I think there's like right now it's a very hostile time to be in like the creative industry, like any kind of creative industry. It sucks. I think the pandemic had a lot to do with it. I think people are really hungry for art and to create art now because of the pandemic.
Yeah, it's like a need to sort of like keep it churning out at such a speed that you have to keep up with, versus actually getting like bogged down, air quotes, in like caring about whether or not it's actually like a worthwhile project or anything. I mean, we have so much like quantity over quality nowadays with entertainment.
Well, I think what was really disappointing to me about going to film school is seeing like, not to call out BU too much, but they did take all of my money, so I don't really mind. But I think you can tell what they want in their films from their students is like high quality producible shorts that get into film festivals. So the BU logo shows at the end and everyone sees it and goes, oh, look, they went to BU. And that's it. Like there's really no room for experimentation. They want these like very, very straightforward, very like predictable films, and I think a lot of creative industries are the same way, where like people are looking for that return on investment. And I also think that there's this idea of like, obviously you should get paid what you're worth in the artistic community. And like, I do think artists not getting paid is a huge issue. But it's like, unfortunately, right now, I think, you can't wait until like that perfect job in the artistic community comes around for you to start. For you to start making art. I think you just have to like do it and accept the fact that like, it's not going to be lucrative, but you're going to love it. Yeah.
That's the risk. I mean, we kind of indirectly were talking about Everything Everywhere earlier, and that's very much a risky movie. And I don't think a lot of people would have made it, but just seeing how something like that can work. And I guess tying that back to Boston, even because the Daniels went to Emerson. I mean, that's such an inspiring movie, not just because the actors are like legacy actors coming back into their own, but it was very much like this almost shouldn't work. This almost shouldn't have been successful, and like we shouldn't have enjoyed this meandering 2-hour movie about hot dog fingers and laundry and taxes, but we did, and it was a risk, and it ultimately paid off. And I think more people, and hopefully because of how that movie did work out so well, that hopefully we will start seeing more of that. And I think we are, like, with to be a film person on a podcast talking about A24. But I mean, just to talk about A24, I mean, they are a really huge industry. They're a huge studio in the industry right now because they do take risks. I mean, they're putting on movies that are balls to the wall insane, but people want to see them. And obviously there's a market for that.
Yeah, that's true. And I kind of love how like weird, fucked up movies has become like A24's brand.
I mean, it kind of goes back to like us talking about our current generation's like nihilistic humor. Like we like weird, fucked up shit, especially if it is juxtaposed with something beautiful and cool and funny and interesting. Like
Right,
that,
and sincere.
striking that balance is a really like hot button thing right now.
I definitely think so too.
Yeah.
In an attempt to try to bring this full circle,
Sure.
We went in a whole bunch of different ways. Yeah.
no, I think it's perfect because it feels like Waiting for Godot came, and the whole absurdist movement came at a time where it was after World War II, and you get this like incredibly huge psychic traumatic event that happens in the world, right?
Yeah.
And so like creating works, right? Not just to see them as products, but to be able to process what's happening in the world. And
Right.
Charlie, you were saying like, coming out of that pandemic, artists like are hungry to make things. And I'm sure so much of that is just to kind of process like everything that's going on. So I feel like we're at a similar point where we've experienced our generation experienced like quite a few things at this point, right?
Yeah.
And we're so globally aware of everything. So how can we kind of process all this information? I think Everything Everywhere All at Once is one of the movies that is trying to do that. And I'm so glad that there's not just movies up here, but exciting work on the ground that's trying to do that as well. So my last question, or it's less of a question, is I like providing an opportunity to elevate whether it's promoting things that are down the line. You guys have already touched on that a little bit, or if there's other artists in your scene that you think is doing exciting work that you would like to plug, or things that are coming up. Is there any work that you would like to sort of promote at this point?
Definitely. I'd say from Deadword, we will have a couple slots at Porch Fest. Our stage manager, Jake Mourinho, will be doing a DJ set, and I believe Joey Del Ponte, our music director, will be playing with Mall Cops at his place as well. Or if not with Mall Cops, then with himself. And please check out Mall Cops. That's Joey's band. They are wonderful.
Boston Music Award winning
band Mall Cops. Yes, they're wonderful. I'm trying to think, is there anything Deadword wise? Otherwise?
we will be doing Godot again. We have a slot in the upcoming Boston Theater Marathon,
Right.
Which is also kind of in conjunction with Suffolk University as well. They're helping us with that as well. And then, we will in Porch Fest, and we definitely will be doing a bunch of other stuff going forward.
We will also be starting a podcast eventually. I think Joey and Jack Yateman are going to be heading that up. And we'd love to have you or anyone from Martian Radio Theater on eventually as well. So
Please, it'd be my
Return
pleasure.
the hospitality.
Exactly.
Absolutely. Fantastic. And where can folks find you guys on social media?
So I am at It's Bork, BOURQUE on Twitter and Instagram. And then I think it's just Deadword Theatre on Instagram.
Yes. So you our official one is Deadword Theater. You can find me at Charlie Lunardi on Instagram or Citizen Pain on Twitter. I don't tweet anything worthwhile though. So
And I guess I will lastly plug that you can also see I do occasionally write for alstonpudding.com. So please support us and come see all the fun things that we're doing over there as well.
hell yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys so much for taking some time to chat about Waiting for Godot and all the work that you're doing.
Thank you for having
so
us.
much.
This was so fun.
Yeah.
You've been listening to Martian Radio at the Theater. If you like what you've heard and support what we do, I encourage y'all to share our work. You can find most of it on our website at martianradiotheater.space or on our social media at Martian Radio Theater. Oh, here's a wild thought. You can even subscribe to our Patreon. That's patreon.com/Martian Radio Theater. No biggie either way, you do you. Down the road, we will be hosting more live events, including workshops and variety shows, as well as producing a limited film series called The Imposter Syndrome. The sets are pretty much built, the puppet is nearly assembled, and our performers are super excited to enter production. All we need now is a checkered floor and a little bit of luck. Anywho, that's all, folks. Take care now.